Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Morning Meta. I am yours truly, Travis Spencer.
I'm Camilla Crawley.
Camilla, are you ready? We have a wonderful guest today.
Yes, I'm excited about our guest today
Mhm.
and everyone out there. Oh, just wait. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. I can already see it happening that way. Our special guest for today is Nanci Luna Jiménez, and she's the founder of the Luna Jiménez Institute for Social Transformation.
Mm.
So, before we get into talking to Nancy, first, I want to remind everyone that, now we're in spring, right?
Mhm.
So we have some new themes that are going to inform our practices for this season. Our themes for this season are first, awakening and new beginnings,
Mm.
cultivating self awareness and embracing opportunities to start anew. Then we have renewal and growth, reimagining life with clarity and focus. And finally, blooming and becoming, intention setting and manifesting. All right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Some wonderful themes here.
Mhm.
So, for today, of course, we're going to be focusing on community conversations. And our guest is someone that I became aware of, I would say, it was towards the end of last year. An organization called Zero to Three had a conference in Baltimore, and I kept getting these emails. And I was like, I just want to see some of the things that they're offering. So they had an email where you could go in and preview some of the workshops. And I saw this particular workshop that Nancy was facilitating. And when I read the description, I was like, yeah, this sounds good. And then that sent me down the rabbit hole. So I went to Google, put Nancy's name in, put all her information in. Then I found out about the Luna Jimenez Institute for Social Transformation. I went all over the website and just looked at everything. And once I realized that Nancy and her organization was focusing in on healing engaged leadership, I knew that I had to reach out to her. And so that's what I did. And Nancy responded. So from there, here we are,
Yes.
basically, right? So let me tell the audience just a little bit before we hand it over to Nancy. So in 1994, Nancy founded the Luna Jimenez Institute for Social Transformation. It's also known as Legist. Legist Healing Engaged Leadership Practices equip organizations and individuals to more effectively, authentically, and sustainably work toward their purpose aligned impact. They offer transformational experiences, including remote workshops and in person retreats, ranging from 1 hour sessions to multi month immersive programs. Nancy is also a keynote speaker, coach, and certified master level facilitator. So I'm going to hand it over to Nancy right now. So, Nancy, just tell us a little bit about who you are and however much you want to share about what led you into this work and where you are now with it.
Thank you for that beautiful welcome, Camila, and introduction, Travis, to this today's podcast. And it feels very aligned that we are doing this on the first day of spring, on the equinox, actually, and
Mhm.
definitely
Yes.
a time of rebirth and renewal. It feels like that in my life and in my life's works path as well. I will say that I was 26 years old. I was lovingly encouraged to attend a public workshop by a woman I had never met and I didn't know much about. This was before the time of websites, Camila, so I couldn't go down that rabbit hole with her. Um, but I deeply trusted that in my life that were pointing me in her direction. And I trusted that trust led me into a meeting room at the YWCA in Watsonville, California in 1993, in February of 1993. It's almost exactly 32 years ago. And I
Wow.
had no idea what to expect. And all I can say is that it changed the course of my life. I learned many, many things from that woman who eventually became my mentor, dear friend, and in many ways a part of my family. Her name is Lillian Roybal Rose, and I want to speak her name. She's still alive, but she's in very advanced stages of dementia at this point, and I very much consider my work to be the legacy work of hers that I carry forward in the Luna Jiménez Institute for Social Transformation. And to be honest, I think the folks that were pointing me in her direction were very clear that I was passionate about social justice and wanting to see things change on a systemic and institutional level. And I don't think they knew how to tell me that I wasn't doing it in a very effective way, and that there were some things that I learned from someone who had a very different approach. I say this with all, kindness for past Nanci, who was doing the best she could, but I was very much of a mind that I could only make change by calling people out, by shaming them for the behaviors, by pointing out the deficit. And I did it from a place of deep hurt, of unhealed harms from racism, from genocide, from sexism, from ableism. I was born disabled as a young person and lived my early life that way. And classism. I was also born poor and raised in a working class and working poor family for the early parts of my life. And I never got a way to talk about that experience that was healing. It was from a place of anger and hurt that I wanted folks to know how badly that behavior, those harms, those institutional harms had impacted me personally, but also my communities and my family. And they should just stop it. And I really thought that if I could make them feel really bad about what they were doing, they would stop it. That really was my theory of change at the time. And I will just say that Lillian blew that all apart for me in the best possible way. She pulled me aside at one point and she said, "Mija," which is how we say my daughter in Spanish. It's a term of endearment. She said, if you really want, in this case, we were talking about white people. She said, if you really want an end to racism and you want to see white people change, you've got to love them. You've got to create a space where they can heal. They already feel bad about themselves. They wouldn't be passing on the harms of racism if they didn't. And when we heal them and they reconnect their goodness and their humanity, that's when we will end racism. Well, needless to say, I could hear the brilliance somewhere in the back of my mind of what she was saying, but it was not immediately available to me that I could then do this thing magically. And Lillian, with so much grace and integrity, said to me, if you really want to do this work, Nanci, you've got to commit to your own healing practice. You can't do this work in any effective, sustainable, or integrous way if you haven't done or aren't willing to do everything that you're asking others to do. And to be honest, I said yes in an instant, not having any clue about what that would mean and what she was asking of me. But already I knew she had something and a purpose and a focus in her leadership that I trusted. And a big part of it, frankly, there were two things. One is that she talked about feelings, and not just talked about feelings, she guided people through their feelings to a place of healing. I'd never seen anyone do that with the art that she was able to do it, but also in a community type group setting that wasn't a therapeutic setting. It was a social justice, social change setting. And that was inspiring to me. And the other piece, frankly, was everything I learned about adultism in that workshop, which was an oppression I had never heard of before that day. And yet when she described what it was, I intimately knew as if it had always been a thing that I'd known, even though I didn't know the word for it. I started that journey with her 32 years ago. We traveled around the country together. I learned everything I could from her. She stopped working in 2014, and I have continued to develop her theories and practices into our framework, a 7-part framework of healing engaged leadership. And I bring that framework into everything we do, whether it's keynotes and whether it's retreats, whether it's our virtual programs. It's infused with all of the teachings that I learned in those 2 days and in the 20 years that followed that we traveled together.
Wow, what a wonderful story. It's beautiful,
yes.
right? When you were talking, Nancy, about the way you approach social justice in the beginning, about, I just need to call everybody out, make them feel what I feel. It made me think about that saying that we often hear, hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think about that. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's so profound that everything aligned for you, with the people that you were surrounded with and meeting someone that eventually became your mentor. I'm wondering, even before that, did you always feel like this sense of maybe knowing or trusting or intuition? Because that was something you just mentioned too about, like, you just decided, like, I'm going to trust. But that something always within you, even before that moment, that you would just be like, you know what, I feel it, I'm going to trust it, go?
That is such a great question, Camila. And I was actually just reflecting on this the other day, that there's a way that I've led a very charmed life, that I've really trusted the universe and my ancestors to guide me. Even when things logically, rationally, like if you sat down with pen and paper or you tried to talk it through, people would say, don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. You're setting yourself up for failure. That's never going to happen. Like, I applied to one graduate program, which, who does that? No one does that. And yet I got in, I got funded. It was also one of the programs my partner at the time applied to. We got in. What were the odds that we're both going to get into a PhD program in the same university, in a city I'd never been to, in a university, but it's series of moments like that I just keep believing. And I'll tell you what, my magic number is 3. If someone points me in a direction 3 times, I don't argue. I go. If people I trust and I hear it from 3 different parts of my universe, I say yes. And then I trust that there's a learning to unfold for me in that yes. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's the magic rule of improv. Just say yes, keep going with it, because what is life if not one big improv? So I feel really blessed about that. And I do want to say, I had tremendous support from my partner at the time to take that risk, to travel with Lillian, to learn from her. And frankly, he was pivotal in one of the voices that pointed me in her direction. And that was someone that I really trusted. So I think just surrounding myself with people that I know have really good judgment, have a picture of things that I don't have. I don't have to have all the information, but it's good for me to be around people who I know have different information that I trust. And that's what's allowed me to step in. And I love that you brought up the idiom hurt people, because Lillian really took that to the next level for me, Camila. It was like, well, okay, yeah, hurt people, but she was like, but we don't start out hurt. And that was not how I was raised. I was raised that we were all born with original sin, that we were flawed by design. That was my early Catholic upbringing that really shaped how I saw myself and how I saw the world. And Lillian said, no, we're actually all born good. And we're all born innocent, and we're all born precious. And I still remember when she said, no baby comes out of their mother's womb wanting to do oppression, wanting to harm other human beings. it was so clear. Like, no, when have you held a baby and thought, ooh, bad? No, none of us have held a young one and had that thought. And so it really was this huge my ground shifted underneath me to start with that premise. And then she followed through that we got hurt as young people, first by adultism. And if you allow me, I'd like to share a little bit about what adultism is. And I do this here because most people have never heard of it. And yet I would offer all of us have experienced it in some way. Adultism, the definition is basically it's the institutionalized and systematic mistreatment of young people. And by mistreatment, I don't mean necessarily calling Child Protective Services or CPS. I simply mean the ideology that young people are not fully human, that adults are the fully human form. And until we become adults, we don't get the same rights or dignity, respect, or treatment a
Yes.
full human gets. Yeah.
Mhm.
So like as young people, we're not believed if it's our word against an adult's. If we're next in line in the grocery store, there's no expectation that we're waited on next or talked to. We're often talked over, or the adult with us will explain what we want or what we're trying to say. There's so many insidious ways that adultism shows up in our lives. Some of the times it can show up as adultification for those of us as young people who were the oldest child put in charge of younger children and cousins and expected to be the adult, even though we had no business in that role and we failed miserably because we were supposed to, because we weren't adults. So there's a lot of ways that adultism can show up. And this is not in any way to blame any adult. I want to be really clear that parents are miracle workers and nothing short of that. This is about systemic oppression, and it's a setup for everyone involved. And in fact, parents are targeted as well because they've had children in a society that doesn't value children. And we know this, any place that you're an ally to a group that's targeted, you will also get targeted. So I want to say this to all the parents that are listening. I'm very clear about your goodness. You did not sign up to be on the non-target side of an oppression for the young person that or people that you're raising. And yet the system sets us up that way over and over and over every day. So we first get hurt there. We get the messages that we're not human, fully human. And that hurts because you don't hurt people without feelings. And then we try to feel the feelings. And then what happens? And Travis and Camila, you know this. If you started to have your feelings, what were the messages you got as children?
Shut down.
Yeah, shut that
Shut
down.
Correct it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything from like big girls and big boys don't cry to you want to cry. I'll give you something to cry about, or wipe that smirk off your face, or just smush, 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 smush. So confusing, right? Young people trying to spontaneously do this healing work and release these emotions. And instead we're getting these messages like, you can't do that, but they're going to go somewhere. And we see this on young people where we internalize them and we do things that are self-harming for us as young people. And we also see it in the bullying behavior in children that are trying to get those feelings off of them. And so they target often someone who has just a little bit less power than they do. And it's not our fault. I think it's really important. We also, in my work, we're not permissive with that. We're not saying, well, now we understand why it's happening, keep going. No. Now we understand why it's happening. How can we support this to stop at the fundamental level? And we think, my theory of change is that when we heal from adultism, we take on bigger and bolder leadership. We stop the self-harming and numbing behaviors, which show up as everything from drinking, drugging, working ourselves, isolating, all of the things that take us away from being present in our current life. And this isn't a moral thing. This is about being present in our world, which I think when we're healed, we're able to do. And we're able to be more connected with ourselves, with each other, and on this planet, this one precious planet that we have.
So many things are coming up for me. I really enjoyed the piece that you were speaking about adultism. Um, so I believe that when we're looking at our teens, adolescents, much of their acting out that we're saying is just the result of being a teen. It is actually them responding to all of the things that have happened to them and not being able to really deal with them. You know, we talk about maladaptive behaviors. At some point, those maladaptive behaviors don't work anymore, and I think that oftentimes it's when um, the teens are moving through that period, and those behaviors aren't working anymore. You know,
Mhm.
but they don't know what else to do, so they end up going deeper into their own pain. You know, so that's what's coming up for me. The question I would like to ask is, um, so how do you see supporting the teachers and adults in recognizing when it's showing up, and how
Mhm.
can they um, correct it, you know, or
Mhm.
be aware of it and shift it?
Mm. Well, let me just first validate what you said, Travis, and I want to be really clear. I am not an early childhood educator. That is not my training. I know there is very good science and work done on development that I do not want to in any way. Um, I'm not speaking into that space. So let me
Mhm.
just say that science exists and that's a study that exists. And I want to add to it. What if, what if we considered that one of the ways that young people are using behaviors is to show how they got hurt? That it's not
Mhm.
just a description of their development and their brain, but are actually trying to get our attention around a harm that they didn't get to heal or a series of harms that they didn't get to heal. And if we saw that as an invitation instead of something to be controlled or something to be
Yes.
contained or something to be stopped, but an invitation to get closer, an invitation to learn about this hurt and to give them the space to feel it. And I want to say this very, very, very carefully. We sadly live in a society, and I'm going to speak very specifically about the United States because it's the society I know. We live in a society that has pathologized emotions.
Mhm.
The best we've figured out to do with young people is to get them to talk about their feelings and to learn to regulate their feelings. But we've really not validated that young people know they need to feel their feelings.
Mhm.
And a big part of that barrier for us, frankly, in our society as adults and in a society with adultism, is that we're scared of our own feelings.
Yeah.
And my hope is, and my intention is, we can't create the spaces for young people that we haven't yet created for ourselves. This goes back to the oxygen mask on the plane, right? We all know this.
Yeah.
Before you put the mask on your person who's next to you who needs your assistance, you got to put yours on first. And
Mhm.
yet, everything that we are doing, in my experience, limited as it is, in the spaces of education and early childhood that are working with young people, is we are not prioritizing our own healing as adult
Mhm.
allies to young people. And when we don't do that, and I mean, again, I do this myself, when we don't do that work, we come across as techniquey and young people don't trust us because
Mhm.
there's something that's out of integrity when we're asking them to do a body of work we ourselves haven't done. So it goes back to what I learned from Lillian. So I think one of the most powerful ways to be an ally to young people is to commit to your own, to look at how adultism affected and impacted you. And almost always we'll have, and I'm going to ask each of you this, do you have an age as a young person that was your favorite age?
Mhm.
Oh.
And it's fine if you don't. But does one come to mind?
Yeah, I would say so. I think I would say between 5 and 7.
Okay,
Yeah, right around that time.
great. And how about for you, Camila?
I'm thinking around that same age, and I would bump it up to 8. I would say 5 to 8. Yeah.
Okay, those were your sweet spot windows. And when was it
Mhm.
hardest to be a person for you? What was the hardest age?
I'll let you go first. Yeah.
I would say, hmm, like that, the end of middle school, going into high
Mm.
school. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similarly, yeah, I would say pre-adolescence. So 11,
Okay.
12 to about 14, 14, 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have found, and you can tell me if this isn't true for you, when I'm working with allies, adult allies, so as parents or caregivers or in the early childhood kid system, what I find is where we had the sweetest time in our childhood, that's the age we tend to want to teach, hang out with, have the most slack for. We're at our best in that period of that age group because it was our best time. And in our
Mm.
hardest time, if we haven't done our work, we tend to be less available. We tend to be shorter with young people. We have less slack in that time. In other words, a lot of the harshness and the hurt that we don't heal gets passed on to young people in that age, and we want to avoid it.
Mm.
Now, you both happen to have a little bit of overlap, but I do get people who are like, oh, middle school was my favorite time, and I hated being 4. So it will vary. And those are usually the folks that are drawn to teach in those pockets in the educational system. They want to go back and relive that experience in a lot of ways. And this is so well intentioned, but couple things that this becomes a trap for, right? We keep trying to relive our experience from that time. We're not
Mhm.
necessarily noticing what's different about being 5 and 8 now, or in middle school, or whatever. It's a different era, so we got to kind of get stuck in that. And it's also not accurate. It's not
Mhm.
accurate that some age was better than another. It's just that we didn't have people around us to think about us in that period. And so it got hard for us.
Mm. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. As I sit in reflection.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, everything you just said, I'm sitting and connecting things. Even when you were talking about, when we're young, depending on your experience with emotions and feelings, and you're describing that, they have to go somewhere. So when they're suppressed in different ways, it's like, okay, where is it going? I think that's a really great thing to just emphasize. And I'm saying it again because I know people are listening and watching, but just to really sit with that, you
Yeah.
know, in
Mhm.
terms of children and as an adult, that if you're not really tuning in and feeling it, that stuff has to go somewhere. So that was
Mhm.
like the first sort of like light bulb, like, okay, let me just marinate in this. And then the second piece is about making that gentle and gradual shift in your mind,
Mhm.
that what we are observing oftentimes is a lot more than what we see with our eyes, that
That's right.
the
That's right.
behavior and everything that's being exhibited
Mhm.
is communication, you
Exactly.
know.
Yes.
And this reminds me also of Dr. Gabor Mate, and he uses
Yes.
this
Yes.
example. He uses an example of a parent, like, being in a grocery store, and the child like falls out on the floor and things like that, and so the parent might think like, oh my god, and go into, like you said, trying to control. And what Dr. Gabor Mate says is that that's a communication, where that child could be communicating that they
Mhm.
need something because they don't know how to do it another way. So I
Mhm.
think,
That's right.
just kind of really wanting to repeat that and emphasize that so people could really sit with those two points that you've made, which I think
Mhm.
just are really, really critical. So,
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Camila. And I want to say it's a communication, and I want to say how do I want to say this? When we are expressing our feelings in that way as young people, we are saying, I feel disconnected. I
Mm.
I need you, and I can't get you. I can't find you. Come get me. And we often do it in a way that it's like, I'm convinced you don't like me, you don't want me, and you don't love me. That's what the message of disconnect is saying in that young person's head. That's the only way. They feel bad about themselves. I can't possibly be lovable. I'm going to act out this feeling of not being lovable. You're going to see me do the most unlovable behavior right now. And it's the challenge for any of us as as adults who care about young people at that moment to crawl in with them. And that's
Mhm.
going to be really hard when that nobody crawled in with us.
Yeah.
And I will say this with like a whole lot of sadness and a little bit of embarrassment. You know, my younger sister was a teen mom. She lived at home with her first child was born. And I remember, well, I will say two things. My older sister and I, we had both experienced corporal punishment, but my younger sister did not. Things had shifted by the time that she came along as a young person. And she was very clear that she did not want to raise her child, with corporal punishment. But the pressure from my family was that if you don't use corporal punishment, you're not going to raise a good child. That was the parenting view at the time. My I remember being in the house and my nephew having a tantrum, and my mom and I were sort of watching from the doorway, and my baby sister did something I'd never seen before, which was she got on the floor with him and she got close to him and she held him. And it was, I have to tell you, I was both shocked by the behavior and I was a little judgy. I was like, I really think that's the thing you need to be doing. Like, I'm not a parent, first of all. And I really was not about to back this teenage mom, but I watched that. And then my mom pulled me aside and she had a similar judgment smirk on her face. And then she said to me, "You did that once." And I said, "I did." I was kind of cautious. You mean have a tantrum? And she said, "Yes." I said, "Just once?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, what happened, Mom?" She said, "I poured water on you and you never did it again."
Mm.
And my heart sunk. And I realized, oh, yes, all of those hurt feelings never got to get out. I learned early there was no room for that as a child. And my baby sister was creating all kinds of room for her son. I didn't see the brilliance of it at the time. I wish I could say I backed her, but I'll tell you in that moment in the doorway with my mom, I knew that the way I had thought to handle a tantrum, I would never do it.
Mm. That's a beautiful story, though.
yes, it
Yeah.
is.
It
Thank you.
reminds me of with my kids. I made a vow when they were very young that I would raise them in a way that they can be anything that their abilities would allow them to be. And by making that vow, it shifted the way that I parented because it meant that I needed to be able to communicate with them. So I began to build a relationship, a different type of relationship instead of authoritarian. It's more about collaboration. And so
Mhm.
to hear what you're saying, this is really, I think our listeners are going to feel what you're saying and think about what does it look like to connect with your child in a very
Mhm.
different way. You know,
Mhm.
yeah. So I think that story is a beautiful story.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story also too, Nancy, because of the vulnerability that you just shared as well.
Mhm.
And sharing that, at that time there was some judgment,
That's right.
that was involved.
That's right.
And now
That's right.
at this point, you realize the wisdom in what happened. And I think that's also important for people to hear,
Mhm.
because as parents, I can only imagine you start hearing all the things that you connect with, like, oh, I'm doing that, I'm doing that, I'm doing that. And you start thinking like, oh my gosh, am I a bad parent? But then you can also hear where someone else, didn't know it all, judge,
Nope.
and also was able to shift. So it's
Yes.
not the end, it's not the end,
It's
and
not,
you things,
it's not.
you know.
Say my mother shifted. My mother shifted. Watching her daughter raise her children with a different set of values and philosophy, my mom shifted and came to really respect her daughter's parenting style, and radically she followed it. She followed it, which I think about who my mom was. She passed away a couple of years ago, but we were all in a very different place, I think, in our relationship by then.
Mm.
Wow, that is just awesome. You know what you just made me think of, Nancy, when you talked about how your mom shifted as well?
Mhm.
That made me think
Mhm.
of healing.
Mhm.
Yes.
Oftentimes Travis
Yes.
will share about how healing, and you can do it in your words, but the sentiment is that healing is not just for ourselves, it's also for our ancestors too. Like when we heal ourselves, we heal our ancestors, and then we heal moving forward. So your sister,
Yes.
your sister being
Yes.
that one who provided this, this other way, healing, it's almost like the
Yes.
healing, came from her and then to your mother and then to the next person.
Mhm.
uh,
But that's the beauty of healing. It's so
Mhm.
interesting. I know that oftentimes, healing is this internal process, right? But then it becomes relational
Mhm.
as well. So
Yes.
what you just shared about your sister, yourself, and your mother, all of that speaks to all of those things. So yeah, I love this. I love this particular conversation that we're having, the direction that we're going. You know, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, this is
There's
dope.
Gloria
This is a very
Salua. If you there's a one of my mentors. She's an author and an activist, and she wrote a few books. She passed away not quite a while ago now. Her name is Gloria Salua, and one of her quotes that I love is, "I changed the world, I changed myself." Or you can say, "I changed myself,
mm,
I changed the world." And it really is
mhm.
mhm,
part of the story behind the logo of Logist, which it's got many meanings, but one of the meanings of the logo is the ripple effect, like to be the energy that and change that
mm,
you may never be a witness to how far that ripple goes, but you're changing it in all directions for everyone who comes in to know the effects of the pebble that you are. And it's hard in these times I mean, I wouldn't say it's only in these times. Let me back up. Because of adultism, we're all made to feel powerless. We're made to feel small. We're made to feel like somebody knows better than us. Somebody's going to do more than we can do. Someone more powerful is going to come along. It really hurts us into waiting. Whereas I want to just say, if you've hung out with a 2-year-old, they are clear they're in charge and you can't convince them
Yes.
otherwise. So if that isn't a testimony to how organized and impactful adultism is, that it would crush the 2-year-old spirit, but it does. That's what it takes. It
mhm,
takes an oppression to have us get so confused about how powerful we are, because that is not how we come into the world. And so when we have these
mhm,
messages internalized of hurt that we're powerless, we start to think that it doesn't matter what we do and that nothing we do will make a difference. And yet I promise you, everything we're doing, every action we're taking or not taking is having ripple effects. And if we
yes.
can understand the power of us individually, but more collectively, There really isn't anything more powerful than us.
Yes.
Mhm.
I think that okay. So what you just shared, I'm really feeling. I'm thinking about the piece that you just shared about the 2-year-old. So you
Mhm,
can't tell
mhm,
a 2-year-old that they don't know. You know, they like, I can
mhm,
walk
mhm,
now, I can have a talk, and I can feed myself. I know. You know. So, but you're absolutely right. What ends up happening is, instead of us feeding that strength and that power that this child is exuding at that point, we begin to shape. In that shaping, we begin crushing. You're
That's
absolutely
right.
right.
That's right.
I'm I also work with teens, so
Mm,
I see that play out. You know, so there are a lot of teens who are afraid of being themselves. You know, and it takes um, unconditional positive regard, what I found, to really support them into stepping into just naming. They're not acting their truth, but just for them to
mhm,
name it. You know, so
mhm,
absolutely right. You know, so that's the question I would bring to the parents. You know, what would it look
mm,
like to move from
mm,
a place of empowerment with
mm,
your 2-year-old throughout their life?
mm,
You know, as children to young adults. You know, how
mm.
powerful will they be if we did that? Empower them. You know, and teach them
And
instead of to control them.
100%, Travis. And I think I mean, I appreciate that we as adults and parents in particular take seriously the role of shaping the next generation, making sure they turn into good, stewards, citizens, community members, however you want to describe this. And the truth is, young people come in already knowing this. And it's
Mm,
hard. I mean, if you think of every major global social movement started by young people,
mhm,
Mhm.
they know
Yeah.
what is just and what is fair. I mean, you have to, sometimes those stories, like Claudette Colburn's story has been buried, right? Rosa Parks was the figurehead, but Colvin
mhm,
has now, she's gotten her due, the 15-year-old who was the first to say, no, I will not move from this seat, but she was not considered a quote sympathetic character for the movement. She was dark skinned, she was poor, and she was 15, right? We're not going to follow that. So I think there's something about a friend of mine uses the term, which I love, which is we're not parenting, we're spirit keeping. So, how
mm.
do we
I like that. Yeah.
tend the spirit? How do we keep the spirit? We don't need more submissive humans on the planet. And yet, when we raise children with an authoritarian style of parenting, which parenting is leadership, we raise
Mhm,
people who look for authoritarian leaders.
mm.
Hmm.
Message.
It's
Yes, I
not
was just getting ready. Yes, you
It's
hit it right
not
on
it's
the head.
not disconnected because
Yes.
we've
Mhm,
basically said, "You don't know nothing, you don't know better. I know everything.
Mhm.
Do what I tell
mhm.
you. Trust in me." And
Yes.
so you're going to either be blindly following, looking for that authoritarian, more powerful, controlling leader figure, or you're going to react against everything that looks controlling or
Mhm.
leadership like in some way. I mean, we tend to flip it one way or the other. And frankly, the global 10 trends are telling me there's a bunch of young people who are looking for authoritarian parenting styles in our leadership right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
They're not
Mhm.
disconnected. Adultism is the key to all of this, in my view.
Yeah, yeah. I, I'm. Is anything coming up for you? Because I got
Yes.
so much stuff
Yeah.
coming up for
What
me.
you just said definitely definitely brought something up because as I mentioned in the beginning with 0 to 3, that
Mhm.
organization focuses in on training and tools and advocacy when it comes to early childhood um, matters. And so with some of the work that we do, working with professionals in different areas, I'll just say in general, some of those things come up in terms of leadership. And so now I'm just starting, like everything is just so starting to connect because of the way that you
Mhm,
just took us through each thing in terms of
Mhm.
leadership. because
Mhm.
if that was your experience with adultism, you don't necessarily know a different thing or a new thing, then you take that into your leadership as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So I guess my question for you is, when you are interacting in your workshops and sessions with people who are in these leadership positions,
Mhm.
is that where you start in terms of the first step? Are you starting with adultism with them? That's like, okay, first, this is our first layer, our first step before you go into anything else with leadership.
100%, Camila, which
Okay.
is why I think, you know, people want leadership development and they get tools and they get techniques that will take them
Yes.
only so far. Because the
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
truth is, if we don't look at these early hurts, we are going to either be reacting against or replicating our earliest models of leadership, which were parents and adult caregivers in our lives. And we often do this completely unconsciously.
Hmm.
It,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
it's a big part of like my women's leadership program that I've had now for 3 years is really become one of our signature programs. And a big chunk of the work we're doing in that program is looking at our relationships with our mothers, because they were the first female leaders that we encountered in our life, our young lives. And most of us as female leaders have either been reacting against what they did to us or replicating it, or both. But at no point are we understanding there's hurt back there, that once we heal it, we have a range of ways that we can show up as a female leader. We're not limited by what that hurt was or what we saw modeled. That isn't define us. But so often, because then our mothers were often shaped by the very oppressive forces that we're leading into, it's hard for us to imagine that there's another way, or we think our way is somehow fresh and new when in fact we're just reacting she did.
Mhm.
And it's not fresh and new. It's just rigid in a different way. And so we really try to go back to what's the earliest experiences of leading that you had? Where did you try to make things go well? Where were you backed? Where were you subverted as a child, as a young person? And where did that leave you feeling either hopeful and or powerless and discouraged? And if we don't look at those pieces, it feels harder and harder to be sustained in our leadership, to not be isolated in our leadership, or even want to lead at all.
Mm. I know that you usually have the sentence stems that we do at the very end.
Mhm.
I have one more question slash comment
Mhm.
that
Okay.
at the core of I am the Institute of African American Mindfulness. We desire to empower. We
Mm.
want we desire to support people stepping into their power and living within that power. So if I could give you a megaphone and you can shout it from a rooftop, what would you tell our listeners about stepping into their power if anything is coming up for you?
Mm. Well, to draw from my Boricua brother, Bad Bunny, and
Mhm.
his message at the halftime show, it wasn't shouted, but it reached millions and millions of people as he looked into the screen and he just said, "You are more powerful than you imagine. Don't give
Mm,
up. Don't stop believing in you. There
mm,
is a young person in you who had a dream wanted for the world and your life. Connect with her, connect with him, connect with them. Listen. They're a reliable guide."
mm. I feel that. Mm, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you for that question and letting me bring Bad Bunny into this conversation, because I don't want to
Yeah.
miss a moment to do that if I can. Gracias, Benito.
I love it.
Mhm.
Mm. All right. So, well, you want to do the sentence stems first, or have Nancy tell us about what's upcoming
Oh,
first?
okay.
Or
Well, let's ask you, Nancy.
Mhm.
Would you like to share with us
Yeah.
what's coming up for you in your organization next, or
Yeah.
would you like to hear our sentence stems?
Sure. Well, how about, why don't you give me the sentence stem, and then I'll share what's coming up, and then I'll come back to it. How about we do a hybrid?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So with the sentence stems, you can complete the sentence with the first thing that comes to mind. So you don't have to take
Okay.
a long time overthinking it or anything, like what first thing that comes up for you. So the first
Okay.
one is healing in African American and African descended communities looks like.
Hmm. It looks like communities coming together to express art, music, dance, and love.
Ashe. Yes.
Right. Our next sentence stem is community to me looks like.
Community to me looks like being seen and known and loved and accepted in your most vulnerable, raw, and struggling self, and knowing that you are being held in grace, generosity, and compassion,
Hmm,
and you do the same for others.
I really like that. Okay. And
Yes.
the last sentence stem is joy to me looks like.
Ooh, to me, it looks like swimming with the water in the ocean. Joy is unbounded love. For me, I find it in open water swimming in the ocean in Yemaya, who's the mother that holds all the tears, all the healing, and all the power, and guides the transformation, because water is change.
Yes. It is. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So I want to, just give you some time to share any upcoming events or programs or anything that's going on with Legis that you want to share with our
Sure.
audience.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate you giving me some space for this. The first thing I want to say is, as a thank you to you and to your community, we are going to be sharing, and I think you'll find this in the liner notes or in the connected to the podcast. We're sharing a resource called "Being Allies to Young People," and it's a free guide. It's a PDF with our top 5 practices for how to be in integrity in our relationships with young people in our lives. So you can download for free. And the link that you downloaded is LJI, and then there's a dot, and then ST, and then /IAAM. So that's a gift to your community. I also wanted to mention that I'm going to be coming into your neck of the woods, into the DC Early edX conference on April 17th. So I'm not sure if any of your listeners are local or in the area or in early childhood. It's already sold out. I know that. But if you're attending, I'm leading 2 sessions. One is called Relationship-Based Leadership, and the other one is on understanding adultism and how to end it. And then I do want to mention, we are so grateful. I've been doing this work for 32 years. I've met folks in just about every sector and field, and early childhood has really taken a love to the work that we're doing. And we did get a grant to pilot a fellowship for early childhood educators. And we're working with a few partners, and we're hoping that we're going to open this opportunity up in early 2027. So if you do download the Allies to Young People PDF, it's going to add you to our growing community and newsletter list. And so we can go ahead and you'll stay updated on that if you're in the early childhood education field, but you'll also find out about the other programs that we're offering. We have a program we're going to be offering that's going to be on demand called Unapologetic, inspired by Benito again. So we'll talk more about that. And then I'll just share a little bit of our contact and social media information. You can reach me at info@LJIST. And that is one of our websites is legis.com. And then I also have a personal website for my speaking, which is Nanci and coaching, NanciLunaJiménez.com. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I very much hope that folks are able to found me, Camilla, and go down whatever rabbit holes that we can support you in your healing on this journey of leadership and love that we are on together.
Yeah. And what we'll do, all of the things that you've named, we're going to put them in a newsletter and send them out to our community.
Great.
And also this year, as we're meeting with different educators, we want to add your information to our resource list. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, and let's see, there was something else that I wanted to mention, but it's I'm forgetting it now. I think that probably was it about the newsletter to make sure that we were going to put that information out to everyone. Oh no, this is what it was, because you mentioned.
We lost her.
Okay.
Oh no! Oh, now.
Sounds great.
All righty.
All right. So there was something that you mentioned about relationships and leadership. So I wanted to say very quickly that that's something that I would love for you to come back and talk about, because between yourself and others who are doing healing centered engagement with leaders, that's one of the things that has influenced me as well, in terms of really looking at relationships and how that supports leadership. So I would love to talk to you about coming back and sharing on that topic.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Nanci, for joining us, and everyone that is watching and listening. I know that at least one thing from this conversation is resonating with you, and you can take it with you, sit with it, allow it to really sink in. So many wonderful wisdom, gems of wisdom that were shared today. And we really appreciate everyone for continuing to join us in this community and watching Morning Metta and Community Conversations. And so we want to invite you to continue on this journey with us, as healing never ends. We're always becoming. So join us each and every day, because we're going to begin our days grounded, intentional, and connected. Ashe.
Ashe.
So let's see.